For more than 100 years, archaeologists believed they understood the layout of Machu Picchu. Every temple, every staircase, every stone terrace carved into the Andes had supposedly been mapped and studied. But a new scientific scan just changed everything. Using advanced ground-penetrating technology, researchers studying the ruins high above Cusco detected something no one expected: a perfectly sealed chamber hidden deep inside the mountain beneath the city. Not a natural cave, not a crack in the rock, a deliberately constructed hidden space built during the time of the powerful Inca Empire. The location of the chamber shocked researchers the most. According to the scans, it appears to sit directly beneath one of Machu Picchu's most sacred areas, a place historians once believed was purely ceremonial. Why would the Inca hide a secret room beneath such an important structure? Was it a royal burial, a vault of sacred artifacts, or something intentionally sealed away before the Spanish ever reached Peru? Before we reveal, make sure to hit like and subscribe, because some people don't want this discovery to be talked about. And if the scans are correct, scientists may be standing above one of the greatest hidden discoveries in the history of Machu Picchu. Now, before we get into what the scan actually revealed, you need to understand something about this place that most people never stop to consider. Machu Picchu should not exist. Not in any practical sense. Not in any engineering sense. If you describe this location to a modern structural engineer without telling them what it was, they would tell you, in clear, unambiguous terms, that this is one of the worst possible places on Earth to build a permanent settlement. Here is why. Machu Picchu sits at nearly 2,400 meters above sea level. It occupies a narrow ridge between two mountain peaks, the aptly named Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain, with near vertical drop-offs on multiple sides. There is almost no flat ground. The entire site tilts. The bedrock beneath it is fractured and unstable. The slopes are so steep that in modern construction they would trigger mandatory geological risk assessments and, in all likelihood, immediate rejection. And then there is the rain. Annual rainfall at Machu Picchu can approach 2,000 millimeters per year. To put that in perspective, London, famous for its grey, drizzly reputation, receives around 600 millimeters annually. Machu Picchu receives more than 3 times that, and it does not fall gently. The Andean wet season delivers it in concentrated, violent bursts. Rainfall intense enough to strip topsoil from an unprotected slope in a matter of hours. Rainfall intense enough to trigger landslides capable of erasing an entire settlement from a mountainside overnight. This is not a background detail. This is the central engineering challenge of the entire site. Any structure built here by any civilization at any point in history would face an immediate and continuous war against water and gravity. And yet Machu Picchu has stood for over 500 years, not crumbling, not sliding, not dissolving into the valley floor far below. Standing, largely intact, season after season, storm after storm, century after century. That is not luck. That is not simply good stonework. Something far more sophisticated is at work here. And the scan, as we are about to see, just revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle that researchers had never found before. The terraces. Not what you were taught for over a century. The answer to how Machu Picchu survives seemed obvious. The terraces, those iconic cascading platforms, more than 700 of them, wrapping around the mountainside in graceful descending rows, were celebrated as brilliant agricultural engineering. The Inca, historians said, carved these terraces to create flat-growing surfaces on otherwise impossible slopes. They grew maize, quinoa, and potatoes here, a clever farming adaptation in a challenging environment. Elegant, practical, and, apparently, well understood. It is a beautiful story. It has appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibits for generations. It is also, according to the engineers who have spent years actually pulling the site apart, layer by layer, fundamentally incomplete. Here is what those engineers found when they looked past the surface. Each terrace is not simply a leveled shelf of compacted earth. Beneath the visible growing surface lies a precisely constructed four-layer engineering system. At the very top, rich, cultivable topsoil, ideal for planting. That part we got right. Directly beneath it, a layer of fine sand. This acts as a filter membrane, preventing the topsoil from washing downward, while allowing water to pass through slowly and evenly. Below the sand, a thick bed of gravel and small pebbles. This is where water moves fast, laterally, under pressure, channeling toward drainage outlets built into the terrace walls. At the absolute base, rough, loosely packed stone blocks. Their job is to disperse hydraulic pressure over a wide area and direct flow into a central drainage conduit that runs beneath the terrace floor. 4 distinct materials, 4 separate deliberate functions, all arranged in exact sequence, all repeated without meaningful variation across more than 700 individual terraces spread across the entire mountainside. This is not farming infrastructure. This is a standardized, industrial-scale hydraulic filtration system built into the side of a mountain. The growing surface at the top is almost incidental to the engineering purpose of the 4 layers below it, and the moment you see it that way, an entirely different and far more unsettling question forces itself forward. If this system was built to manage water, what volume of water was it actually built to manage? The numbers that broke the agricultural theory. This is where things stop being theoretical and start being mathematical. And the mathematics here is what ultimately led researchers back to the scan data with completely different eyes. Hydrologists studying the site ran a straightforward calculation. Given the known porous structure and dimensions of each terrace layer, they calculated the maximum drainage rate per square meter. Then they multiplied that figure across the total surface area of all 700+ terraces operating simultaneously. The result was, to put it plainly, staggering. The combined drainage capacity of the Machu Picchu terrace system, operating at full capacity, is equivalent to the steady-state flow of a small river. Not a heavy shower, not a seasonal stream, a river. A continuous, high-volume flow of water processed, filtered, and expelled from this mountainside on an ongoing basis. Now compare that to the supposed source. Rainfall. Even during the most extreme weather events ever recorded in the Andes, once-in-a-century storm systems that dump extraordinary volumes of precipitation in a very short window, the total rainwater volume falling on the site represents only a fraction of what the system is engineered to handle. We are not talking about a modest safety margin. Engineers build safety margins of perhaps 20 or 30% above expected load. What we see at Machu Picchu is a system engineered to handle volumes that dwarf the rainfall input by an order of magnitude. That is not caution. That is a completely different problem being solved. Think of it this way. Imagine visiting a small house in the countryside, a modest 2-bedroom cottage, and discovering that someone had installed an industrial ventilation system on the roof, the kind you would find in a chemical processing plant or a large-scale manufacturing facility. You would not assume it was there to handle steam from a morning shower. You would know immediately that it was designed for a far larger, far more constant source of discharge originating from deep inside the building. The same logic applies here. A drainage system engineered for a small river was not built to manage afternoon rain. It was built because there is something beneath this mountain producing an enormous, continuous volume of water that has nothing to do with what falls from the sky. And this calculation is precisely what sent researchers back to their scan data. Because if that volume of water is rising from below, where is it coming from? And what is it flowing through? The fault lines, the mountain's hidden plumbing. To answer that, you need to look at what sits beneath Machu Picchu. Not what the Inca built, but what the mountain itself is made of. Geologists have documented for decades that Machu Picchu occupies an extraordinarily specific geological position. It sits at the intersection of a dense network of tectonic fault lines. These are deep fractures in the Earth's crust, places where rock plates grind against each other under enormous pressure, shifting over geological timescales and releasing energy as earthquakes. The region around Machu Picchu has several major active fault systems intersecting almost directly beneath the site. For a long time, this was interpreted one of two ways. Either the Inca were simply unaware of the seismic risk, or they accepted it deliberately for spiritual and symbolic reasons, building on unstable sacred ground because the land itself held power. Both explanations carry an implicit assumption that the fault lines were a liability the Inca tolerated. But what if the fault lines were the reason they built here at all? Geological faults are not just earthquake hazards. They are also highly efficient natural water conduits. The fractures created by fault movement act as underground channels, pathways that collect and direct groundwater from a vast surrounding area down into a concentrated zone. The massive rainfall that saturates the surrounding Andean peaks does not simply roll across the surface and disappear. A significant portion of it percolates deep into the rock, follows the fault fractures downward and inward, and accumulates beneath Machu Picchu as an enormous, pressurized body of subsurface groundwater. This is called hydrostatic pressure. And in a fractured mountain, it is not passive. It is active, constant. It pushes outward against the rock walls of every fault channel. It saturates the soil from below. It seeks every available weak point in the mountain's structure and presses against it, day and night, every day of every year. Left unmanaged, that pressure is catastrophic. It liquefies soil. It widens fault fractures. It destabilizes foundations. It causes the kind of deep-seated slope failures that do not announce themselves with a crack. They simply happen, suddenly and completely, taking everything above them into the valley in seconds. The Inca did not build on this fault network despite the risk. They built a machine directly over it to control that risk, a machine whose visible surface is 700 agricultural terraces, and whose true function is to relieve subsurface hydraulic pressure before it can destroy the mountain from the inside. That is the system operating beneath your feet when you walk Machu Picchu. And the scan found something built at the very heart of it. Why the scan happened? The anomaly that started everything here is the timeline that matters. For years, researchers studying the hydraulic engineering of Machu Picchu had been circling the same uncomfortable conclusion. The numbers did not add up. The system was built for volumes of water that rainfall alone could not explain. Something significant had to exist underground. Additional infrastructure, additional channels, something the surface archaeology had never revealed. The visible drainage channels built into the terrace walls and stairways account for only part of the picture. Hydrologists modeling the full system kept hitting gaps, places where water should logically be entering or exiting the network, but no physical channel had ever been found. The model had missing pipes. That is what prompted a research team to commission a ground-penetrating radar survey of specific zones beneath the site. Not a general archaeological survey. A targeted hydrological investigation, looking for missing infrastructure in the areas where the drainage model showed the largest unexplained gaps. Ground-penetrating radar works by sending radio wave pulses into the ground and recording how long it takes for them to reflect back. Different materials, soil, rock, air, water, and constructed voids reflect those pulses differently and at different speeds. A skilled analyst can interpret those reflections to build a subsurface map of what exists beneath the surface without excavating a single stone. The team expected to find drainage channels, underground conduits they had missed, perhaps a larger central collector running deeper than previously thought. They did not expect to find a room. What the scan actually found. The ground-penetrating radar data from beneath one of the site's most sacred zones revealed a subsurface anomaly that researchers initially assumed was a sensor error. The reflection pattern showed a large enclosed void, not the irregular shape of a natural cave or a geological crack, but a structured, bounded space with what appeared to be deliberately constructed walls. The dimensions suggested a chamber roughly the size of a substantial room, and it was sealed, completely sealed. No entrance passage visible in the scan data, no drainage outlet, no connection to any known surface structure above it. Not a natural cavity. The geometry was too regular, the boundaries too deliberate. A room, built by human hands, and then closed. What made researchers stop completely, and what took days of data review before anyone was willing to put it in writing, was the location. The chamber sits directly beneath one of the most restricted and sacred areas of the entire Machu Picchu complex, an area that for generations of historians was understood to be purely ceremonial, a place associated with solar worship, Inca cosmology, and the divine authority of the emperor. A place so significant that access to it in the living city would have been restricted to the highest levels of Inca society and priesthood. Whatever is inside that chamber, the people who built it considered its placement beneath that specific structure to be essential. Now here is where the hydraulic story and the chamber story converge into a single, deeply significant discovery. When the research team overlaid the chamber's location onto the hydrological model of the drainage network, the same model that had been showing unexplained gaps for years, the chamber sits precisely at the largest gap, the missing node, the place where the model could not account for where an enormous volume of pressurized groundwater was actually going. The chamber is not off to the side of the hydraulic system. It is not incidentally nearby. It is, according to the data, positioned at what would be the central convergence point of the underground fault network, the exact location where subsurface water pressure beneath Machu Picchu is at its highest and most dangerous. This changes every interpretation researchers had previously offered. Was it a royal burial? Possibly. The Inca did seal important burials in enclosed stone chambers, and the sacred nature of the location above is consistent with that. Was it a vault of sacred objects? Gold, textiles, ritual items evacuated before the Spanish arrived? That theory has been proposed for sites across the Inca Empire, and the sealed, inaccessible nature of this chamber fits that pattern. But there is a third possibility, one that the hydraulic data makes more compelling than either of the others. What if this chamber was a control structure, a deliberately engineered vault positioned at the heart of the underground pressure system, not to hold objects, but to manage the mountain itself. A sealed space designed to act as a pressure regulator, a buffer between the enormous hydrostatic forces rising through the fault network and the foundations of the most sacred structures above it. The Inca placed their holiest spaces above what they valued most. What if what they valued most, what they were most urgently protecting, was not a god, not a king, but the stability of the ground beneath the city itself? What sits inside that chamber may be the final answer to a question that has quietly undermined every easy explanation of this site for decades, and until excavation begins, the mountain is not giving it up. The machine that outlived its builders. Step back for a moment and consider what we are actually looking at here. A civilization with no computer modeling, no electronic sensors, no ground-penetrating radar, no hydrological simulation software, no GPS survey equipment of any kind. And yet they correctly identified the most dangerous subsurface geological zone in their region. They understood, with enough precision to act on it, that an invisible network of fault fractures was feeding pressurized groundwater into this mountain from a vast surrounding area. They calculated in some form that this pressure would eventually destroy any city built here unless it was actively and continuously relieved. And then they designed and built, by hand over decades on a sheer mountain ridge, a hydraulic processing system of a scale and sophistication that modern engineers examining it 500 years later describe, without exaggeration, as remarkable. 700 terraces, 4 precisely engineered layers in each one, a combined drainage capacity equivalent to a river, subsurface channels invisible to centuries of archaeological survey, and at the center of it all, a sealed chamber that the hydrological model says sits at exactly the point where the system had to have its heart. They did not just build a city on a dangerous mountain. They performed geological surgery on it. They relieved the pressure building in its core the way a surgeon relieves pressure in a damaged organ, steadily, carefully, continuously, using technology that has never stopped functioning. The water still flows through the stone channels today, not because someone is maintaining them, because the system they built half a millennium ago is still running. The terraces still filter, the drainage conduits still carry, the mountain still stands. Ruins, by definition, are things that have stopped working. Machu Picchu has never stopped working. What the scan revealed is not just a hidden room. It is evidence of a level of engineering ambition so far beyond what historians had attributed to this site that it demands a wholesale revision of how we understand what the Inca actually knew and what they were actually trying to do. They did not build for their generation. They built for the mountain. And the mountain, 500 years later, is still standing exactly where they left it. What happens next? So where does this go from here? The scan data has been submitted for peer review. Excavation of a site like Machu Picchu is not something that happens quickly. The site is a UNESCO World Heritage location, one of the most protected archaeological sites on the planet. Any physical intervention in the ground requires extensive permitting, international archaeological oversight, and environmental impact assessment, which means the chamber will not be opened tomorrow. But the research team has proposed a phased approach. First, a more comprehensive and higher resolution radar survey of the entire zone, not just the area beneath the sacred section, but a broader sweep, designed to map the full extent of whatever underground infrastructure exists. The initial scan covered a targeted area. What lies beyond those boundaries is still unknown. Second, if the chamber entrance can be located, because every sealed room has an entrance, even if it was deliberately blocked. A remote sensing camera could potentially be threaded through without disturbing the structure. Non-invasive visual confirmation of what the chamber contains before a single stone is moved. What researchers are most cautious about, and most excited about in equal measure, is the hydraulic connection. If this chamber is indeed a structural component of the pressure management system, rather than purely a storage or burial space, then opening it incorrectly could theoretically interfere with a system that has been maintaining the mountain's stability for 500 years. The engineers who built this were careful enough to design something that still works today. The engineers examining it are being careful enough to respect that. Somewhere beneath the most sacred ground, in one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world, a sealed room has been waiting. The scan found it. The question of what it contains and what it was truly built for is now one of the most consequential open questions in Andean archaeology. Look at Machu Picchu one more time. Not as a postcard, not as a ruin, as what the evidence now tells us it actually is. A machine. Still running, still doing exactly what it was built to do. A geological processing plant wearing the outer shell of a sacred city. A system so precisely engineered that 5 centuries of weather, earthquakes, and erosion have not been able to stop it. And at its center, at the exact point where the mountain is most vulnerable, beneath the space the Inca considered most sacred, a sealed room that no one has opened since the empire that built it fell. The scan found it. What is inside it will not stay hidden forever. When that chamber opens, it will not just be an archaeological event. It will be the moment we finally understand what Machu Picchu was truly built for, and the civilization that was sophisticated enough to build it. If you want to be here when that story breaks, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the mountain has been keeping this secret for 500 years. It will not keep it much longer.